Welcome to the Motoring Podcast, your weekly discussion of motoring news. This is episode 555 on Tuesday, the 5th of December, 2023. Hello, I'm Alan, and I'm both all alone, and I've forgotten to write any menu items. So we're going to skip over that, and we're going to head straight into some follow-up. Good news for the first follow-up story. Gosh, that sounded like James May. I'm so sorry. Volta Trucks. Volta Trucks, we talked about a few weeks ago. They were in financial difficulties after their sole engine and powertrain supplier went bust over the summer, causing delays. Going to have a significant bit of re-engineering, if you remember rightly, to the chassis for everything to fit and everything to work again. It's going to set them back quite a bit. That was causing issues. What's happened now is a venture fund that was previously a large investor, in the Swedish parent company Volta Trucks AB, has bought all of the assets of the entire UK arm and has founded a new company called Volta Commercial Vehicles Limited, and that's good. They're now going to continue. They're gonna set all of that up. Where they're saying they're pleased to have safeguarded the future of Volta Trucks. That's good news. They did whenever they went under, they had 5,000 vehicles on the order books and an investment of around 2.6 million. So let's just see what happens. The good news about this, of course, is that it's good for the workforce as well as their customers and their partners. And wish them all of the best success in the next little while and until they're on the market. Other follow-up, a very quick one. We knew that this was going to come whenever Wales changed the speed limits. The sort of default speed limit within towns to 20 miles an hour. What that's meant is that obviously some roads have very, very strange allocations, and it turns out that the A4222 in Aberthin in the Vale of Glamorgan, according to this BBC article, includes stretches of 20, 30, 40 and 60 in the space of 1.8 miles. It's going to be reviewed. I mean, the Welsh government is saying that there'll need to be a bedding-in period, and some of these will be revised. And I'm sure that this will be one of the ones on the list to be appraised to see what's going to happen there. So yeah, there's some parts of the world where that's just not quite working. One last thing. Is that the Welsh Government has been criticised by the Office of Statistics Regulation after claims that the 20-mile-an-hour zones would only add a minute to journey times. The OSR queried how statistics supporting the claim were presented. In response, the Welsh Government said it welcomed the input and had made more information available online, which sounds very much like, Yabu sucks, we've done it now, so there's nothing you can do about it. But maybe that's just me being a little bit over-cynical. Anyhow, let's move on from that and move on into new news. Although, to be perfectly honest, it doesn't feel particularly new. This is kind of on the borderline news, this one. CEO Thomas Schaefer, you can tell where this is going from here, has confirmed that there will be job cuts made across Volkswagen, claiming that the company is no longer competitive due to its high cost and low output. Previously, Volkswagen had pledged not to carry out any dismissals until 2029. But it turns out that Schaefer, in a meeting with senior managers in the middle of a big savings program from earlier in the year, he said they would take advantage of the demographic curve to reduce staff numbers by offering partial or early retirements. Remember, in Germany, the union presence and the works council very, very strong in big and, to be honest, even medium-sized companies. So it's impossible to sort of go out and it's very, very difficult to make people redundant, to sack people in Germany. So by offering partial or early retirement, that's one way around it. Obviously, the challenge there is you do lose an awful lot of sort of corporate wisdom that way, and you do have to make sure that everything's managed properly, he says, in consultant mode. So yes, that's what they're looking, and they're saying Gunnar Killen, the human resources board member, who's a brave man, saying, we need to finally be brave and honest enough to throw things overboard that are being duplicated within the company or are simply ballast we don't need for good results. You do sometimes feel they could get rid of entire brands under that sort of basis, don't we? So yeah, not great at Volkswagen. They're trying to have immediate freezes on spending, all these kinds of things, whilst at the same time trying to invest in R&D and to have both internal combustion and EV programs running at the same time. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Schaefer, however, has also said that the company needed Volkswagen team spirit more than ever. What's better for team spirit than getting rid of loads of them? Earlier this week, the SMMT held its 106th annual dinner in London, and as part of the proceedings, they were talking about some of the investment and some of the changes that's going on in the automotive sector in the UK. They were saying that automotive manufacturing in the UK secured £20 billion in investment over the course of 2023, which was more than the previous 7 years combined. That private sector's commitment, bolstered by some of that government funding as part of advanced manufacturing plans, make sure that the UK remains a global manufacturing, innovation and trade hub. And they were talking about the worries about tariffs between the UK and the EU. I think we've talked about that enough over the last little while. But what really was important, and what sort of brings up and emphasizes what Andrew and I have been saying for a while, that the investment's great, but is it working towards something proper? And they were talking about the government's newly published advanced manufacturing strategy. So finally, there is some sort of industrial strategy visible to those of us outside the centre of government, because that's what's really needed. I haven't had a chance to read the strategy yet myself, have a look at it. But even just having one and knowing what the aim is and sort of what good looks like is a big and important step in all of this. Up until now, there's been an awful lot of words. There's been some money thrown around, but there hasn't been a clear story about where that money's going and what it's intended to be used for in the wider scheme of things, as opposed to just over the next 4 or 5 years or any of these things. So that is some pretty good news. Generally, SMMT being pretty upbeat. Really, the tariffs being their big bugbear on that. You'll notice that we're not covering. Speaking of SMMT, not doing the new car registration figures this week. We'll do them next. Sorry, they came out whilst I was asleep, and I just didn't have time to read them, consume them, and look over them properly before recording this morning. It's one of the joys of time zones, which means that these days the podcast is recorded with a cup of tepid coffee and not a beer. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Europe, ACEA, the European Automotive Lobbying Group, whose president, is currently Renault boss Luca Di Maio. They would like to create a European equivalent to the Kai car for small urban EVs. I think this is a really interesting idea. As I'm sure you all know, because you listen to the Motoring podcast, a K car in Japan is a vehicle built to very strict size, sort of footprint and weight and power and engine capacity limits, which means that it gets certain breaks in terms of insurance, taxation, declaring how much space you have to park it, all these kind of things. I think this is a really good one because it'll bring back a sort of segment between small cars and the what are they called? Quadricycles. That's the one. And the sort of powered quadricycles that we have these days. Obviously, powered quadricycles, I mean the Citroën Ami, the Renault Twizy, and the various rebadgings of both of those vehicles. It would allow something that's a little bit more grown up, but not completely a car. If everyone's working within very strict limits, it's actually really good because it does sort of normally boost innovation whenever you're doing that kind of thing, and also means that people will know what the boundaries are regarding costs and all that kind of stuff. I think it's a really interesting one. I think that these vehicles are not necessarily, everybody goes, oh, a city car, and small urban EVs. Really, where they're useful, this kind of car is actually outside of cities. In cities, you have there is hopefully public transport and other ways of getting about, and everything's much closer. However, whenever you move out into the countryside, there is actually a space for vehicles like this to make it easier for just general mobility. We've talked about that before. We talked about it when we were talking about the Tokyo Mobility Show this year. That kind of extra or suburban vehicle is a useful segment, and that's something that this could fill. I think it's a really good way to bring costs down and therefore vehicles back within an EV area. I think it's a big deal, and I can understand why it's sort of being brought up in France as well. So be really interested to see how that goes and then whether that actually comes to any form of fruition at all. Moving to the other end of the automotive spectrum from small electric K cars is small cars with pop bang exhausts. There's been a landmark court ruling, and it was brought by the DVSA, the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, against an aftermarket tuner called AET Motorsport. And as a result, AET have been fined for modifying cars with a decat exhaust, so removing the catalytic converter, and a pop bang ECU map. The DVSA's Market Surveillance Unit, or people who sit and read adverts, found that the West Yorkshire firm AET Motorsport, according to this car article, was openly advertising decat exhaust systems and noise-generating ECU remaps. The unit's investigators then engaged AET Motorsport to carry out these modifications on a Ford Fiesta ST, of course. So yes, they did it, and as well as that, they pointed out that there was no... they didn't give any warnings about how this was not something that you should use on the road. As a result, they were found guilty of fitting an unsuitable vehicle part to a vehicle which would make it illegal to be used on the road, and the company was hit with fines and costs of £7,234. Yes, important one. That do be careful around that kind of thing. The trouble is we all know what the trouble is, don't we? The trouble is that people going around and being a nuisance with things like this does make everybody else who does other mods, and to be honest, the entire industry around sort of vehicle improvements and tweaks at whatever level gets put under. Well, it should be under scrutiny anyway. but it gets put under an awful lot of pressure and put under threat, because we know what happens is that there'll be a politician-led backlash, which will leave absolutely no room for any kind of reasonableness in the pursuit of Daily Mail headlines. Other newspapers are available. Quick one here. I noticed during the week Geely Holdings and NIO have signed a strategic partnership agreement on battery swapping technology. As we know, NIO very big on battery swapping. Not to repeat things we've said before, not primarily as your primary recharge or refueling strategy. But useful for longer journeys, for road trips, all of that kind of thing. And Geely, of course, very large player in automotive these days. And so the two Chinese companies gathering together to agree on battery standards, swapping technology, network expansion operation, swappable model development and battery asset management is a big deal. NIO has been a little island in this so far, so pairing up with someone as big as Geely is very interesting indeed. Worth keeping an eye on that. I don't think we're going to see anything out of it straight away, but I think it's going to be an interesting one to bear in mind over the next couple of years. One last news story. I'm mentioning this here not because we've not covered it before, but I think that this is a particularly rugged test of it. It's an article from Jalopnik by Erin Marcus, who's saying the first road in the US that charges your EV while you drive opens in Detroit. We've seen this before. We've seen stretches of road we've talked about stretches of road in Belgium, I think, as well as a stretch of road in Israel. I think why this warrants mention. So this road is near the Michigan Central Station complex, which is Ford's innovation hub. It's a fantastic looking building, that Michigan Central Station. It really is. But there's a 1/4 mile long stretch of road with that will work via induction charging if you've got a specially modified EV. It doesn't provide loads of charging. It doesn't. It can give 16 kilowatts to a test van traveling at 9 miles an hour along it. But it's a small. But it does give some charge, and it is possible. I know that 9 miles an hour is not. Well, to be honest, in cities that's pretty representative. Let's bear that in mind. It's interesting because it's in a part of the country where, to be honest, the weather and the climate is pretty rough. So this is a really good test of the durability of this kind of system. There's big frost heaves. The roads get upon by much heavier vehicles than they do in much of the rest of the world, and all of these kind of things. So again, this might reappear. This might just disappear after the first round of press releases. But it'll be interesting to keep an eye on it. And it's interesting to see that this isn't just, that this is being tested by big manufacturers. And not just on test tracks either. I mean, they could just as easily have put in a 1/4 mile strip of tarmac on a test track somewhere and run it. But actually putting it on under a public road where it will be driven on and treated just like the rest of the world, like, it'll be ploughed for snow and all these kinds of things. Then it'll submitted to SALT, all that kind of thing. It'll be interesting to see what happens and just how well the performance keeps up over time. So I think that's a really good real-world test of induction charging roads. That's it for follow-up and new news. As ever, that brings us to Guilt Minute. Quick break in the show where we ask for a tad of financial support to keep the lights on and the hosting running. If you feel the Motoring Podcast is worth a small consideration every month, then you can become a patron. Different levels of patron include different levels of commitment from us to you, including being able to watch the show recorded live. We also have a small range of merchandise in our spring store, from stickers to mugs and t-shirts. If you don't have any spare cash, and we do completely understand, then you can help us by following for free from a podcast player to receive every show as they're released, and by liking and rating the show in whichever way your podcast supplier lets you. If you've done all of that, or even if you've done none of that, then the last thing you can do is to recommend us to your friends or colleagues. New car news yet, and of course there's one new vehicle which has been has been dominating all of the new vehicle news cycles. We're not going to talk about that. What we're going to talk about instead is the Dacia Bigster. So the Dacia Bigster is a bigger Dacia. There. You can have that one for free, Dacia marketing people. It's a 4.6 meter long Ford Kuga rival. And they're saying that the pricing is going to start below £40,000. The Bigster is expected to arrive I just can't say that normally. I'm so sorry. The Bigster will arrive in 2025, and it's the start of Dacia's push into slightly bigger segments than the areas it's been in so far. The biggest Dacia there is at the minute is a 4.3 meter long Duster SUV, which we're going to talk about in a minute. It's worth remembering, Dacia, highest selling automotive brand in France. I know it's Renault owned, but it's just worth saying that it is a volume manufacturer. So this is going to go up against things like the Peugeot 5008, Skoda Kodiaq, and significant jump, certainly in size, over other offerings. It's chunky, very much like the Kia EV9. That's what it makes me think of. It's that very square, blocky kind of toddler's plastic toy car look and feel to it. That's not actually it's that sort of blocks but rounded on the edges. That was actually meant as a compliment. I know it sounded like I was being dismissive. I really wasn't. So it has it's got that chunky look that pseudo off-roaders are attempting to have. No matter what size they are. It's going to be based on the same platform, by the way, as the Nissan X-Trail and the Renault Austral, but it's being engineered right from the start with a focus on affordability. So it'll be interesting to see just how clever they've been reusing parts, all that kind of thing. Usual thing with Dacia. The vehicle is cheaper than most of the rest in a segment, but also at the upper end of size as well. There are a couple of other things mentioned, one of which is that Dacia is getting rid of its selling commercial vehicles. Previously, it's in other markets, it's sold the Docker van and things. I guess that's all been, they've said, no, we're not doing that. Everything's going to be rolled into the Kangoo platform, and it's all going to be done via that. They're saying they're not pushing up on that they're not moving away from affordability, but they are definitely moving very much into a consumer-only space. Also in new car news, the new 2024 Dacia Duster. So it's smaller than the Bigster, he says, stating the bleeding obvious. It looks a lot like its predecessors. It's just been rounded off a little bit. It's a good-looking thing, by the way. Dacia doing good things from a styling point of view, and yes, it will start relatively cheaply. The bi-fuel model that's available on LPG probably won't be sold in the UK. It might be to fleets, but that's more popular in the Netherlands, for example, other places on the continent where LPG made bigger inroads. There'll also be 1.2 litre 3-cylinder version with mild hybrid tech. And some others. No longer any diesel engines for Europe, although they will still be available in Africa. But yeah, diesel engines, according to Car Here, we were accounting for just 5% of sales. More important, I think, is that there's going to be a hybrid version, 93 brake horsepower, 1.6 litre with a 48 horsepower electric motor. Aim is that it can drive around town in electric mode up to 80% of the time. Although, to be honest, Duster's not a perfect town car, but it should be good for that kind of thing. Yeah, it promised to begin at less than £20,000 in from sort of July 2024, and so it'll be interesting to see just how much of the market that scoops up. I guess the cars that are going to be that should be nervous about this are maybe some of the sort of mass market Nissans, Ford to an extent. I'm not so sure quite how much, but Vauxhall Mockers, that kind of stuff. That should be competition in there significantly cheaper. But then I look at pictures of the interior and, you know, there will be some hard plastics. I don't think you're going to have to go grappling in the footwell to find those. But yes, I think it will. You're going to feel where some of that money has been saved. Nice thing about these, nice square backs, super practical. None of your jacked up coupes going on here. I'm desperately trying not to use the term SUV anymore, by the way. That's why I keep hesitating. I'm trying to find another term to use. I'm kind of bored of SUV being used generically as an insulting term when it covers absolutely everything from the when it's being used for everything from a Chevrolet Silverado or a Cadillac Escalade right the way down to a Nissan Juke. I feel it's just too catch-all. And it's just lazy nowadays. So I'm desperately trying not to. So apologies for my hesitations whilst I catch myself. Moving to points of interest. Lots and lots of talk this week, as I've already hinted, about pickup trucks. And what's a real pickup truck and what isn't a real pickup truck, and what's a vanity project and what isn't. So I thought that this was a great opportunity to have as this week's lunchtime read, a piece on the Utopian by car designer Adrian Clark. And it's titled Why General Motors GMT 400 truck design remains legendary 30 years later. And yes, I know that this is a US focused article to an extent, but I think that what it contains is relevant everywhere and shows just what a really good looking vehicle a pickup truck could be. Now I'm going to continue with my mantra that pickup trucks are bad cars by very virtue of the fact that they should be designed for loads and not people, and that there's no storage space and ironically, but this is a great article. I mean, the first paragraph has me by referencing Sir Terence Conran, the Bialetti Mocha coffee pot, swatch, and the Nike Air Max 90s. So you're well on the way towards my heart there. But it's talking about how the GMT 400 platform, which is kind of the classic Chevrolet 1980s Chevrolet GMC pickup, obviously brought us a Suburban, ultimately the Escalade, although that gets a special mention in here. Just how neat and well considered the whole thing was. Really interesting article, nicely illustrated and annotated, and well worth 10 minutes of your time over lunch one day. Good article. I do like that. List of the week is related because, sometimes we try to stick in a production value or two. And it's the car world's most famous design flaws. Now, once again, it is an autocar slideshow. So good luck. There's a number. There's 28 in here. I don't think that all of them count as design flaws. Some of them are just not great. I don't think that there's 28 here. I don't necessarily think that that the Fiat Panda 100 HP being bouncy is necessarily a design flaw. I mean, that's true. It is. I owned one. But my particular choice from here is has to be the Chrysler PT Cruiser convertible, and the fact that it's impossible to almost impossible to get into the back seats. Not that you'd ever want to be seen in the back seats of a PT Cruiser convertible, because the seat belts for the front seats are just always in the way. You have to climb over them, you have to climb under them, but the way that they are positioned from the roll hoop and down means there's no neat way of getting around them. You have to kind of clamber in an ungainly fashion over them or loop through them. Mostly that falls into my my practice of kicking a Chrysler PT Cruiser Cabrio anytime it's down. Your mileage may vary. Go have a little bit of a look. Let us know if there's any particularly egregious one in there which you could choose instead. That brings us this week to the And Finally. The And Finally is from Haggerty. It's by Anthony Ingram, and it's entitled Ad Break. The Rover 100 was a limo in miniature, in which Ant tries to discusses very quickly the trope about a small car parked between big luxury cars outside of either a stately home or a fancy hotel. In this case, the Burlington Hotel in New York. And it's interesting just talking about the advert, one of the adverts for the new Rover 100 series. It's a cracker. I like it. It's a nice little article. That just a couple of minutes, but yeah, nice to finish off after you've read the lunchtime read from the Autopian as well. I don't think I've got any parish notes. Anything else special? It's probably going to be a similar format next week. Just time zones and stuff make it really awkward for guest presenters, and I don't like asking them to take time out of the middle of their day to do the recordings. So hence, I'm sorry you end up with just me. Yeah, it's kind of the way it has to be in the minute, I'm afraid. So folks, don't forget that between now and next week, you can give Andrew and I any feedback and share your thoughts with the show at Motoring Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, on Facebook, and on the contact page of motoringpodcast.com, the hub of all our activities. Remember, you can support us financially via Patreon, and please leave a review and rating on Apple Podcasts or however your podcast app lets you do such a thing. To get in touch with Andrew, you can search for Cracked Windscreen on Twitter and Mastodon. To get in touch with me, Twitter or Blue Sky mostly, where I'm at AJP Bradley. That's Bradley. We'll be back relatively soon. Until then, I've been Alan Bradley. He's been Andrew Clues, but he's not here. And safe motoring.